Uch and Konrad, great to be chatting today. Really glad to have you guys as the first guests on the podcast. Could you share a very brief overview about your role today and what you're doing at the trade desk?
Yeah, well, that's actually an interesting question because I'm in a bit of a transition state right now. So for the last, I guess, let's see, 3 years or so, I've been the director of engineering for the APAC region.
Yeah,
I've had responsibilities for a couple of delivery teams underneath me. For the first 2 years, I had 2 featured delivery teams and an infrastructure team. And this year, we pushed the infrastructure team back into the greater org. And then I was also looking out after the growth across the entire region and the morale, the kind of culture in a regional lead capacity. What I'm switching into right now is actually going to be a role that's going to be called the Director of Growth Operations. Right. So I'm going to kind of focus on the organizational structures, the processes, and the tooling that we need to grow our R&D department.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Sounds like an exciting transition for sure.
Pretty pumped. It's a pretty cool opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Konrad as well, I guess, same question. Would be great to find out a little bit more about what you're doing in terms of your role today at the trade desk.
Yeah. So I joined 6 months ago as a first engineer. I am a lead staff front-end engineer here in Singapore. And so for me, being the first has a lot of perks because it also comes with the increasing responsibility, of course, because you are the one sort of making sure that the right culture and the setting and setting the right example for everyone else who joins after you, right? My primary focus is managing and ensuring strategic growth of UI as an organization here in APAC. But it also became very apparent for me that Singapore as a location needs someone to look after the growth and of its engineering team as a whole as well. So I sort of decided to grab that slice of cake for me. And I think outside of all that, I'm also trying to find some time doing coding because at the end of the day, that is just my passion, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You were the first hire, I think, in Singapore. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll definitely
for the engineering team. We
for the engineering team.
Yeah. We had staff like 70, but yes, first engineer on the ground.
Yeah, for the engineering team. We'll definitely get into that a bit later in the podcast as well. I'd love to track back a little bit to a bit earlier on in both of your careers, actually, in terms of how you guys became software engineers and the track that you guys went down to work for the trade desk. So, Uch, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about that,
sure.
Actually. So, you of course studied at the University of Colorado Boulder, and that was information systems. So, what sort of drove you to, study that degree?
Yeah, so my original focus in school was mechanical engineering, and I spent about 2.5 years in that before I realized I really did not want to solve ordinary differential equations for a living.
Yeah,
which I did like a ton of math and science, like hardcore work, and then was like, I'm just gonna throw this out. But I did decide I did want to get a degree in business eventually. I spent a couple semesters in the arts and sciences, or arts and parties, as one of my colleagues used to call it, and got a very well-rounded education. I ended up graduating with like enough hours for a master's degree too, because it took me so long to collect all the necessary credits to get into the business school. But then getting into the business school, I think I always had a real passion around computing. Always been like into gaming as well. I think that was a big part of it too. But, I wrote my first software program at the age of 8. I wrote a basic program in like a summer boot camp thing that we did, or summer camp thing that I was part of. And it was always something that I, wanted to do. So yeah, that for me was, being able to get the business degree and then having the long period in uni actually turned out to be a really good thing, because I got a really well-rounded education, and I've actually been able to leverage like all the parts of that pretty well.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that's excellent that you've had both sides of the degree there, and sounds like it worked out very well in terms of the length of being at university, which is fantastic. I also read
on your... wasn't too bad for them.
I also read on your LinkedIn that you're a very good sushi chef from your own words, I think, on LinkedIn, a damn good sushi chef. So you were a sushi chef.
I made damn good sushi. I wasn't a good sushi chef.
Right.
I was an apprentice too.
Yeah.
Like sushi. Yeah. Sushi is like it's a trade for sure.
Yeah. Was that something you enjoyed doing as well outside of your sort of core focus at university?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I was thinking about going to culinary school for a while, actually, right. After I dropped out of engineering. My old man had some really good advice. He's like, if you want to become a chef, like go get a job in a kitchen and go see if that's what you want to do or not.
Yeah.
And that ended up actually being something I applied later to as I was coming out of, when I was finishing up my last year in the business school and my degree. I decided to actually quit the job at the sushi restaurant, which I loved. It's a great place. And then go and get a paid internship with a tech company, which ended up being like a massive leg up, like coming into the workforce at that time. And so it was good advice, do what you want. To see if that's what you want to do, like go try it out and actually do it.
Yeah. Fantastic. And that internship that you mentioned there, was that opt-in email?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, building spam cannons. You're welcome.
Fantastic. And that company was acquired, I think. So was it acquired whilst you were there for your internship?
Yeah, it was actually. So I was like the third or fourth software engineer in the company. And I spent about 8 months or 9 months there before we were acquired by DoubleClick.
Right.
We actually became DoubleClick Dart Mail, which literally is like one of the biggest email engines in the world. Wow. Still like they send out a massive amount of email, and yeah.
Wow. That must be an amazing experience, because I think you were the third or fourth developer, right, in the team?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Like it was a really awesome, and for me, it's been a long journey. Like I came out of the uni and I worked for this company and we were in advertising tech. And then I spent like 6 years in finance and 6 years in telecom, and then kind of actually in reverse order, but made it back into ad tech. Yeah. And, it's really actually the scale and I think we'll talk about this more through the episode, like the scale of the problems, even back then for that marketing stuff was really awesome. Like we were sending out, tens of millions of emails an hour and getting, multiples of that back in clicks and emails opened and things like that on events that we had to then like be able to handle and process. So it was pretty cool stuff to work on even early on.
Okay, brilliant. And I think you just mentioned about how that sort of went back into ad tech, and you joined the trade desk over in Colorado, and obviously today you're in Hong Kong. So what sort of drove you to join the trade desk at the beginning? Yeah, so I was working actually in finance, and I was in Boulder, Colorado at the time, working for a small private equity shop, and I worked with a lot of startups in that capacity, and like looked at and talked to a lot of companies, and I actually got introduced to the trade desk through one of my best buddies. One of the guys that essentially was one of the founders here, Mike Davis. He and one of my best friends were they basically worked the first two same jobs out of university together. And Mike had moved back to Colorado to open up the office in Boulder. And they had gone out for coffee. It was like maybe a year later, and they'd gotten together for coffee, and he was talking about what they were doing. And yeah, my buddy Josh just happened, you should go talk to my friend Uch. Like, I think he'd be a really solid fit. And yeah, when I started, I went out to a sushi lunch. It's always sushi. Went out to sushi lunch with Mike. When he was telling me about the business and the scale, which at the time, I mean, we were doing about 400,000 queries per second. And today we're doing something like 14 million or 15 million at peak. Yeah. And so just like the business growth, but even then that's like, it sounded amazing. Like it was still multiples over what I had done at DoubleClick. Just the whole idea of the company just really appealed to me. And so, yeah, it wasn't instant though. Actually, I actually was in the midst of like something, and I started interviewing, and I said, can I take a pause? And then I ended up going back 6 months later and saying, let's keep talking. But super glad that I did. Yeah, sounds very exciting. And I think you must have joined about 2-3 years after the company was founded. Is that about right?
It's about 4, actually.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But you've been with the company for about 8-9 years now, if I'm correct.
About 8, just over 8. Yeah. Getting close to 8.5.
Okay. So you've seen the company sort of grow exponentially over that time period. How many sort of employees were you when you joined? Yeah.
Yeah. So there was about 60 employees when I joined.
Wow.
And we had about 12 engineers. Like I was engineer number 12.
Wow. Yeah.
And today we have, to put that in reference, we have just over like 2,100 or 2,200 employees now.
Yeah.
And we have about 330 or so engineers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. It's scaled so quickly. And I guess in terms of your, progression with the trade desk, you then went from Colorado over to Sydney, I believe, to build the first APAC engineering team. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
How was that experience?
Yeah, I can't thank Jeff and Dave, the founders, and Zach and Art, like the guys that have managed me enough for like all of the opportunity that I've had here. It's really been astounding. I was working in Boulder I was hired as a senior engineer. I was an individual contributor. I was helping to grow the office there. And I happened to go to a convention in Boston with some of the guys. And while I was there, one of them mentioned that, David Pickles, our CTO, he wanted to send somebody to Asia to like seed the team, but nobody really wanted to go. Everybody kind of had family and obligations and wanted to just decamp and move. And I knew my wife, I knew she wanted to live overseas. That had always been something that she wanted to do. And it was something I was interested in exploring as well. Although I will say I was pretty fat, dumb, and happy in Colorado.
Yeah.
had life pretty well sorted, and I was like pretty happy with my setup. Yeah. But I went and talked to her about it, and she was completely for it. And so I went in and asked Dave and Zach if they would consider sending me, and we had some chats, and they said, absolutely. And so, they sent me over there. They sent me to Sydney in 2015, and I spent 4 years there. And coming out of there, I thought I was going to go back to the States, but we had another chat, and we decided that I was still valuable out here in Asia. And so we decided the next best place for me to go was Hong Kong, and been here since 2019, building out the office here, and then, adding Singapore this year and Bangalore. So it's been a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, I guess before your upcoming transition to the new role, your role of Director of Engineering, how many offices were you overseeing in the APAC region?
Yeah, so the way that we're organized is not necessarily like with direct line reporting throughout the whole region. The teams are all kind of geo-dispersed, but for my role as like the regional lead, I was overseeing all of the offices in the region and helping identify the places that we were going to grow into, which included Singapore and Bangalore this year.
Right.
Yeah. So in that capacity, like I said, I look after the hiring aspect in all of these offices. So in Sydney and Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore and Bangalore, and I look after, culture and morale, making sure that, the team is being looked after, their needs are being met, kind of liaising with our facilities and our people management, office management teams, IT, and making sure that the team's got everything that they need. And that's, Konrad fills that capacity as the regional lead now in Singapore. I'm the guy here for Hong Kong, and then I kind of organize all the regional leads across the region.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned that when you were in Colorado, you moved over to Sydney, but just before you moved over, you were in an individual contributor role. So it must have been quite a big transition sort of going over there and building a massive team. So can you share more about, why you decided to go down that sort of route of technical lead and people management, I'd imagine, going into Sydney?
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the things that appealed to me about coming to work for the trade desk is the other options I was kind of looking at in Boulder before I left was going into like a startup and maybe taking on a role like CTO. Yeah. And what I decided at that time was I didn't have really the right set of experience and skills that I felt was necessary to be successful in that. Yeah. And I thought that this would be a fantastic place to get that, to help grow and build a company and scale it. And that's, absolutely played out, luckily.
Yeah.
So when I had the opportunity, to come over to Sydney and start growing something, part of that was also that drive to build something. Like, we had a lead in the Boulder office, and there was room for additional leads there, but to really build something from scratch really appealed to me. Like, that was a fantastic opportunity in my mind.
Okay, that's fantastic. And when you joined there were 0 engineers. I guess in the last sort of 5-6 years, how many engineers do you guys have in the APAC region now?
Yeah, so in 2015, when I got there, it was me by myself. That was fun. And when I left Sydney, in 2019, we had about out of the 60 or so employees, I think about 26 or 27 were engineers. Right. In Sydney. And we had added a team in Shanghai at that time. So we had 5 engineers and a product manager. And then I moved up to Hong Kong. And since then, we've grown across the region. We're now today, we started this year at around 40. We've hired about 35 this year. Wow. Sydney has added the bulk of that. We added about 21 into Sydney this year. So Sydney is like our 3rd largest engineering center globally at this point. It has been for a number of years, actually. In Hong Kong, we are at about 10, and Shanghai is also about 10. Those numbers are off, though. Those are dated. Right. Even as I say it, we're basically, we've doubled our footprint in the region this year. And gone from around 40 to about 75 or 76 today.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, such a story of growth, and it must have been like a very good sort of, I guess, career track for yourself, sort of going through the challenges of scaling engineering teams at such a quick pace as well. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting story. Konrad, I'd love to ask you some similar questions as well, I guess, in terms of how you got into software engineering. So what sort of, I guess, drove you to become a software engineer at the earliest stages of your career?
Let's see. I think I got my first computer when I was like 9. Yeah. And I actually started off with 3D graphics. So I was working with tools like, I think the most popular one these days, Blender, 3D Studio Max, Maya. But after sort of 2 years of doing that, I figured out this is not really for me. Because I don't have the compute to be able to like do big scenes and rendering and all that stuff. Yeah. And things just naturally become more complex, and it's comparable, I guess, to building big scale projects. And so I moved on to software engineering. I remember thinking like I always wanted to learn PHP. It kind of became like this self-propelling idea for me that it would be so good if I knew how to do PHP. Yeah. So I started off with PHP and then Flash as well. Flash was popular back then. It used to be a plugin for the browser that you could do rich content and rich applications. Yeah. And I think I got my first freelance job when I was about 14. Right. I still remember like the feeling of receiving first bank transfer into my account after doing something fun, because like for me, engineering has always been a passion, but also I naturally like doing it because it's fun. You're creating something new, creating something useful, and hopefully people get to use that and to get paid for that. As a child, this is sort of my first pocket money. That sort of drove me into growing the career. Yeah. I started my first office job when I was 17, so still in high school. I remember speaking to the dean and saying, because I used to go to a high school that's very focused on IT. Yeah. So we would have between 10 to 14 hours of IT classes a week. And so I negotiated with the dean to be able to not attend the classes and go to work instead. It's been unheard of and undone before. But thankfully, I had a really good relationship with all the teachers. And so they just signed off on it and I was able to do it. Yeah. And so coming from a really small town, my day would be leaving 7 a.m. to go to school and coming back 10, 11 p.m. after work, nonstop every day. And that really helped me to drive my passion forward. And I had amazing mentors at the beginning of my career. And so they sort of decided to take me on full time, or part time rather, after my internship with them ended. Let's see. I wanted to go to uni. My mother was always pushing me to go to uni. So I took a uni for about 2 years. And then on the second year, I decided that I cannot put 100% focus both into uni and my career. And already at that point, I was, I think, 20, 21. I already knew that software engineering is something that I want to do.
Yeah.
So I made a really unpopular decision with my mom, and I decided to drop out.
Yeah.
I don't think I told her about it for the first month because I was just genuinely scared, because my mom is very traditional. She always believed in you have to have a degree, you have to have a master's to be able to be recognized, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I dropped out, actually it turned out very quickly that this was the best decision of my life, because it paid the dividends really quick for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic story. Definitely keen to know where you learned how to code PHP then, because you mentioned it was you wanted to do that sort of growing up. So how did you learn PHP? Was it sort of like on your own accord? Did you have some courses that you were doing online at the time?
Yeah, I always believed in self-learning. So naturally back then it was like 20 years ago, or maybe 15. Internet wasn't like the way it is today. There wasn't YouTube content as much as there is today.
Yeah.
So you kind of had to go and figure out your way around it. I remember working with, there used to be a really popular forum script called PHPBB, I think. And so there was a lot of community around it. And naturally, you know, people would be tweaking things along and building their own modifications and things like that. And so I got into that. And for me, the way to learn was to go and figure out what is going to happen if I change this and that line, right? You know? And I started tweaking things along, and you know, soon after that, you sort of pick up your way around it. I never really read any books about PHP or Flash or anything to do with engineering. I just kind of like went, made changes, and see how that influenced the software. And that was always the way for me to learn stuff.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Because I guess, as you mentioned, these days you have a lot of like online resources that you can use, like the Udemy, for example, and you have like courses through General Assembly and so on. So there's a lot of different resources, but it must have been quite a bit more difficult, I guess, back at that point.
Yeah, I think when I think about it right now, it kind of gave me the grit to, if there's a problem so I believe that good engineers, you know, no one knows how to solve everything, right? It's just about you being comfortable about solving the unknown. So I think growing up in that sort of environment where I have to find everything by myself and like figure out how things work and do it on my own, without anyone, you know, standing there behind me and telling me, that sort of gave me the grit to be able to continue that throughout my career, you know? I'm never afraid of the unknown. And if there's a technical challenge that I need to solve for and I don't know how to do it, you know, I'll go and figure it out by either talking to people or finding the right resources online. Like you pointed out, there's so many resources these days available. So I believe good engineers should definitely have that sort of skill set and mindset, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's really interesting insight there. And I guess when you left university, you went into later on, you went into the financial services industry. You'd worked for a couple of firms such as UBS. I think your last firm was Goldman Sachs as well. So was there a reason, I guess, why you decided to go into financial services direction?
Yeah, like a little bit on early on. I grew up in a small town in Poland. So there's not really many opportunities for you to grow your career. And so I used to work for a small startup where we build tools similar to, I guess, to PowerPoint, content authoring tools where you could just kind of, you know, build your content and publish it. So UBS and Macklowski is a big consultancy. They were pretty much the only choice if you wanted to grow your career, and definitely if you want to grow your career into financial services, that was the only choice back then. And a lot of my friends, you know, moved on from different companies to work with UBS, and so I already knew what I was signing up for. So it was just it felt like a natural step up for me. And it was a big step up, right? Because, you know, engineering side is one thing, but then coming into financial services, there's the whole domain that you need to learn about that you didn't even know existed, right? So it helped me discover my next passion, which is, you know, working with and building trading platforms. So I continued doing that, I think, for 10 years or so.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. And that was both because I know that I think your last role at Goldman Sachs, you were working on the UI. Were you always working on the UI? I think you had a lot of Java experience, right? But was it back at UBS in the last couple of years?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think it comes from the days when I started off with PHP and Flash. I never really limited myself just to one technology. I always try to, work on a full range of a story, right? If you're given a story, in Jira, Scrum, your Scrum team, I always like to look at holistically. So from back end to front end, think about things like scarcity. And so for me, it was always natural to work with back end languages. I worked with Java, Golang, C++.
Yeah.
Some people say Node.js is a backend environment. I disagree with that, but it's just a matter of opinion, I guess. So I always work full stack.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Definitely got a question I'd love to ask you a bit later on the podcast, actually, because I think at the trade desk as a front end engineer, there's quite a bit of full stack work as well. So we'll get on to that question a bit later. But you, of course, joined the trade desk early this year, as you mentioned earlier, as the first engineer in Singapore, which is very exciting. So I guess in terms of your responsibilities at the moment, I think you mentioned as well that you're leading the team at the moment. That's quite a big responsibility of yours, or taking up a lot of time today. So could you, I guess, just share a bit more about why you decided to join the trade desk and leave the financial services industry, as well as sort of what you're up to today, I guess.
I don't think Uch will like my answer, but I guess it's the true answer. I wasn't really looking to leave Goldman Sachs. So before the trade desk, I was working at Goldman Sachs, and I was very comfortable. Look, my role was good. It wasn't amazing, but it was a very comfortable environment. And I'm sure people who used to work at financial services understand what I mean by that. So I wasn't exactly looking to leave. But then, a recruitment agency who works with us now reached out to me and said, hey, we have this opportunity. Would you be keen to listen to it? And I was initially very skeptical, but I decided to speak to Uch.
Yeah.
And so Uch is really the person that convinced me to that it might be worth considering. So I signed up for the interview, and I really like the interview process. Being given a challenge and making sure that you perform to the best of abilities. That's something that also drives me forward. So I wanted to perform, even if I wasn't sure I'm going to take the opportunity, I just wanted to perform to the best of what I could do,
Yeah.
So it was like a personal challenge for me, I think. And the problems that you're given during your interview at the traders are really the more towards real world problems rather than data structures and algorithms oriented. So I really liked that aspect of it.
Okay.
And sort of somewhere along the way of the interview, I started to convince myself that the traders is actually going to be a good for me.
Yeah.
And so the way my mind works is once I convince myself that I like something, there's no way back for me. And so naturally, my previous employer tried to retain me, but like I said, once I set my mind on something, that's pretty much it. And so, this is going to sound very cheesy, but when I joined, because obviously during the interview, it's hard to figure out if the place is going to be great. There's always a risk, you're taking. But once I joined, once I actually got to know the people and met everyone in the office, back when we could go to the office, it dawned on me that it's probably one of the best choices that I made, in my career in terms of choosing a company.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I love that answer. I don't know why.
I was going to say. It's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And I guess, I'd love to ask you a couple more questions a bit later in the podcast about the interview process. I think that would be really helpful actually for a couple of engineers who are either thinking about interviewing with you guys or are currently going through the interview process at the moment. And I guess your current role right now, you're leading front end, is that correct?
So we have an organization called Core Experiences, which is responsible for building, the main products, the platform and the UI side of it. A lot of that organization lives in US and in Europe. So we're spanning this organization here in APAC as well now. So I was given responsibility for strategic overlook and growth of the part of the organization here and managing the people. But like I said before, I also decided to take on the area lead of Singapore because it was very exciting for me to be able to do something new.
Right. Okay. And how many engineers are you managing today at the moment?
So managing in terms of career growth, let's see, there's 2 in Sydney, 1 in Shanghai. There's another person joining in Hong Kong. So that's in terms of managing the career. And then apart from that, we've got 3 engineers in Singapore, including myself. And I think we have another one joining very soon.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, guys, for sharing more about your background. I think it's always really interesting to hear, I guess, about your stories and how you ended up sort of where you are today. But yeah, I really appreciate the thoughts there. And I guess the next part of the podcast, I'd love to ask you, we've spoken a lot about the trade desk already, but I'd love to ask you a bit more about the company specifically, what you guys are doing at the moment, what products you guys are offering to clients and customers. So Uch, I'd love to ask you a bit more about that. I guess just in a brief summary, could you just share a little bit more about what the trade desk does today?
Sure. Yeah. So the trade desk is what's called a demand side platform. We are an advertising technology company, and we offer a platform that powers the purchasing of digital ad impressions for the agencies that we work with and the brands that they're representing and marketing on behalf of. So, the short kind of like the way I like to describe it is kind of the experience as from like the user. So like Cam, if you were to go to say straitstimes.com and you go look at the finance page, they'll have an ad slot that they actually decided they're going to try to auction off. And so they'll reach out to a supply side platform, which is like an inventory aggregator. Google Ad Exchange is a big example of that. They're like kind of the gorilla in the market there. They will run an auction on behalf of Straits Times and say like, hey, who's willing to bid the most? They'll reach out and fan that request out to the demand side platforms like us. And what we'll do is we'll determine like which of all of the advertisers on our platform would be interested in showing you an ad right now. And if so, how much? So we help price the opportunity, make sure that it's priced to fit what they're looking for from their goals on their campaigns. And if we actually have a bid that we want to place, we place it. If we win the auction, then they notify us, and then the ad that we picked gets served out to you. And then all of that happens in the space of like less than a second.
Okay. Yeah. And I think you mentioned that's at the moment you're about 14 to 15 million queries per second. Is that right?
That's right. That's how many auctions we're looking at every second.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, scale is incredible.
It's kind of mind-boggling. That's like 1 trillion transactions per day.
Yeah, it's insane to put it shortly. Excellent. And you mentioned some of the customers there. You have advertising agencies. Is it possible to share, I guess, a couple of the customers that work with the trade desk at the moment?
Well, I don't know if I can share directly like the customers. I forget if we have those listed publicly or not. I feel like we do. But what I can say is we work with 6 out of the 6 largest agencies in the world today. We can claim that. We work with WPP, Havas, Dentsu, like all of the big 6 in there. These are global holding companies. We also work with smaller agencies, and we represent and work with a significant chunk of the Fortune 500 that are actually advertising in our platform today.
Right. Okay. Do you guys mainly work with like agencies, for example, or directly with the customer themselves? Is it? I guess it's a mix, or what sort of?
It's really predominantly agencies. Right. We want to add value in the value chain for the agencies. There's a number of demand side platforms that existed earlier that decided it would be a great idea to go around to the clients directly and like take the margin, that the agencies are collecting, which is a good bit of margin. But the problem with that model is, and they had to then scale up to actually service those clients as the agency did. So their headcount bloated a lot. Right. And then they also they fell out of favor with the agencies, right? The agency sees them competing with them, like waiting to go into the room back when you would wait outside together, right? Not so much in COVID, they basically would like lose favor with them, and so that's been a huge part of our growth is the partnerships that we have with the agencies and like leveraging them, for the operating leverage and for us to provide value via the tech capabilities that we offer. Like we really want to focus on being a technology company. We don't want to operate as like that agency model where you're just got like, it just takes a ton of people to service the clients directly.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess I think I read an article on the Wall Street Journal earlier this year, and that at the moment the trade desk is taking up to about 8% of market share and actually growing faster than Google's market share at the moment. What sort of, I guess, how are you guys sort of beating the competition at the moment?
So it's about, I think the place that we're really winning at the moment is CTV. Like we offer, we're an omni-channel platform with the one exception there being search, because that is just essentially completely dominated by Google. But for all of the other available digital channels, we're competing in those. But connected TV is the one that's seeing the fastest transform and the shift from traditional way of buying and selling to moving to programmatic buying and selling with targeting capabilities like we provide via our platform. And so, and if you just look at like the total gross dollars, like there's something like 700 billion that was spent last year in advertising, and about half of that's television, a little over half of that's TV. And so that's like the part, and so that's shifting the most. And TV's potentially like is actually like a perfectly fragmented market from the sense that there isn't going to ever be like a Google type player in TV. Likely, it's just too fragmented across markets and offerings. And so like it's really it gives us a huge leg up to be able to race after that, and we've been very successful with our strategy in that regard.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot for sharing more about the trade desk, I guess, and what you guys are doing. I'd love to ask you guys as well about where you are today in Singapore. Konrad, we just got onto that topic a bit earlier about being the first in the Singapore office. So I think, Uch, in terms of a question, why did you guys decide to open up Singapore as an additional development hub in addition to Hong Kong, Sydney, and the other APAC offices?
Well, Singapore is our seat for Southeast Asia, South Asia, Australia, New Zealand. So like we manage, and that's our like regional headquarters. And ideally, if we could, we would put engineering into every business office, because it's really awesome to have the team sitting together and for the engineers to be able to learn from the business team and vice versa. So that would just be the ideal situation. But just because of the import of Singapore, because of the available talent in the market, although it is a very competitive market, there's a strong pool there, and also just the commitment of the Singapore government to really continue to develop out the tech ecosystem. It was really kind of a question of when, not if, we were going to build out Singapore. Right.
Okay. And you mentioned the, I guess, talent scarcity and the competitive nature of the market here in Singapore. Konrad, I guess, is the regional lead here in Singapore. What I guess are the challenges that you guys are seeing at the moment in terms of hiring engineers in Singapore specifically?
Yeah, so I'd say number one challenge that we're seeing is that, and that's just not unique for us, to be honest, is that there's so many companies now looking for talent here. Yeah. And obviously there's only so many people, right? And so it's not uncommon to see candidates with 3 or 4 offers lined up, and they get to choose which one suits them the best. So companies will naturally end up competing in terms of the package, but also it's becoming more and more important for the candidates, not just the package, the base salary and the bonus, etc., but also what does the value the company bring to the world. I was talking to a candidate actually yesterday who said he's looking for an opportunity where he can make change and make impact on people, right, on people's lives. And I feel like the trend is greater because obviously we touch everyone's life who's using internet these days. So yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges that we face.
I see. Okay. And how about COVID as well? Has that created, I guess, any sort of impact in terms of, for example, like international relocation and focusing on hiring specifically within Singapore market itself?
I'd say yes and no. No, because great answer. No, because at the traders, we've always been remote. Engineers and not just engineers, but everyone's been allowed to work remotely, since before COVID. So it wasn't hard for us to transition into this market. Yes, because in Singapore, it is challenging to find senior talent, and so your natural option would be to relocate people into Singapore from outside. But seeing as the market is and how government regulates visas and things like that, it's been more challenging, I would say, in the last year or so. Even if I include my experience from Goldman Sachs to hire external talent from outside of Singapore.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Understood. Yeah. I guess we're sort of seeing the same as well. I think that with regulations, it does make it a little bit difficult sometimes to relocate candidates into Singapore. And because of that, we sort of all the recruiters, companies are going after the same sort of group of candidates at the moment. So very talent scarce. It's an interesting market for sure at the moment. And this year has been crazy in terms of how active it has been. I think we see that situation sort of on a weekly basis at the moment in terms of candidates having sort of more than sort of 3 or 4 offers on hand at the moment. So it's it's an interesting market for sure. And I guess in terms of growth for the upcoming year in 2022, I think I've heard that you guys are looking to expand global headcount by about 50%, if I'm correct, in the next year. Something I read. Am I along the right tracks with that? About 50%?
Yeah. Just like across the entire company. The goal is to hire something around like 850 to 1,000 heads, I think. Okay. And what does that mean for the engineering team out here in Singapore and the APAC region? Yeah. So in this region, we almost doubled, or this year, the size of the team across the region, and the U.S. market has just become, for engineering specifically, incredibly challenging to hire in, because the competition there too is super fierce. And so our goal is to actually try to hire somewhere around to more than double the size in the region here, and to do like 60% of the headcount that we have for the engineering org outside of the United States. We want the majority of it to be outside the US. And I think like a significant amount of that's going to fall into this region. So we're going to be nearly 80 heads going into the year. And then hopefully that'll mean like 80 to 120 net new if we can do it next year. For Singapore specifically, we don't really have caps in any office. We're just trying to hire and grow as fast and responsibly as possible. We also want to make sure we do it in a way that's sustainable. We don't want to just throw a ton of people together. But for Singapore, we're going to end this year with about, I think, a total of 4, and next year, ideally, we would hire, between 8 and 15 more. Would be ideal.
Yeah, from my perspective, I just want to make sure that we hire the best talent, and if we find the right candidate, we're going to find a space for him or for her. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, great. And I guess in terms of getting on to sort of the recruitment side of things, and I suppose the technologies you guys are working with, I think engineers would love to know a bit more about the technology stack that they would expect coming into the trade desk. So starting on the front end, Konrad, I think you're using React and Redux at the moment. Yeah, so we're using React.js and Redux. We're also TypeScript house, so we're leveraging the benefits of TypeScript. The front end is tightly coupled to a platform in C#, so that's the sort of backend language that we work with. Yeah.
Great. And majority C#, and I think on the website, for example, on the Trade Desk careers page, also mentions Java, Python, Golang as well. So whereabouts do you guys use those languages?
So there are, I think C# is probably about 90, and Uch, keep me honest on this one, but probably around 95% of our backend language. The reason why we mention other languages is because we are looking for talent. We're not necessarily paying attention if the talent that we're looking for has a lot of experience in C#. It's more important that they display good engineering practices and good engineering skills. So, we will literally hire people without C# experience and make sure that we grow them into that environment. They obviously have to be comfortable in working with C#, or at least willing to learn it. But, that's not a requirement for us at all.
Okay, understood. And I guess with data real-time processing, this must be quite an important part considering the 14 to 15 million queries per second at the moment. I think you guys are using Kafka at the moment and monitoring tools like Grafana and Prometheus. Could you share, I guess, a bit more about that?
Sure. So we are using Kafka in a rather limited sense. I think we'll see usage of that grow significantly, but we kind of avoided it in the early years just because of the operational overhead to run and manage it at scale.
Yeah.
And we are what we're used most of the back end stuff that we have, like a significant amount of it is written in C# today.
Yeah.
There is a lot that happens in Java though as well, and Scala for that matter. Because when we start getting into the things that relate particularly to the data products that we build off of our data sets, like the Apache projects, Java's, like really the JVM family is like the one that is the first class citizen across all of those projects. And so, we run a significant amount of EMR and Spark, and like all of that's going to be in Java and Scala. Python is used in various places on the DevOps side, as well as in the more data science and that side of the house. We're using Golang most heavily actually in our network. So we actually we've been Golang has actually got a ton of advantages in that area specifically. And one of the engineers we brought in Australia early on, he's amazing network engineer and has really kind of paved the path for the way that we do our networking as software, not necessarily as hardware. So that's where we see the most amount of Golang.
Right. Okay, great. And in terms of infrastructure, cloud, you guys are using AWS and Linux at the moment. Is that right?
So we're across everything.
Yeah.
Everything but GCP. So we have a mix of on-prem and cloud. For the bidding data centers, once they scale to a certain point, it's just from an economies of scale standpoint, it's cheaper to build it ourselves and to run it ourselves. And so we have almost all of our bidding sites and a number of our backend processing sites or just actually the database sites are in the United States are all run on-prem. We also run a massive footprint within Amazon. So that's where we traditionally did a lot of all of our data from around the world would get backhauled to that. And that's where we do processing in the United States on that. Outside of the United States, we have a number of bidding sites and tracking sites. The bidding sites aren't as big. And so we're using a mix of actually Alibaba Cloud in China and in Hong Kong. And then we're using AWS for the other sites in various locations like Singapore, Tokyo, Frankfurt. Then what else? As far as the mix, I guess, and then actually we're using Azure too now, because it turns out that some of our clients like Walmart, who we announced earlier this year, they and Amazon don't quite get along well. They kind of consider each other to be primary competitors. And so Walmart doesn't want their data in AWS. And so we're in the process of, and we have been working for the better part of a year on this, on standing up a whole bunch of our platform in Azure so that we can support Walmart as well as other clients that are going to be sensitive along these same lines. And then as far as a mix of operating systems, because it's C#, we, predominantly a lot of our servers were Windows to start. I think this year we actually crossed the tipping point where we now are majority Linux, but still have a significant footprint that's Windows as well. But we've been moving fairly aggressively towards .NET Core. So even in the stuff that we're running on C#, and a significant, all of our bidders today actually run on C# with C# on top of Linux. Right.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Thanks for the explanation. That's really clear. I'm sure the engineers would love to hear more about that. I guess on the deployment side and containerization, you guys are using Docker and Kubernetes. Can you share a bit more about that as well?
We are in the early stages of that. So we've actually scaled this platform on essentially a monolithic architecture. We had almost everything in one single repo. And there was something like when I joined the company, and this didn't change too dramatically over the 8 years, we had like 12 web services and like 12 backend services that were doing most of the work, or almost the majority of the work. Now, that's grown significantly. And one of the things that we embarked upon this year in particular was a very concerted effort to move and transform from mono to micro. And a lot of that is actually, a lot of that focus is actually driven by the desire where we realize that the mono is actually reducing productivity and slowing us down, and we want to flip that back on its head and get back towards more agility for all of the engineers.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And in terms of the methodology that you guys follow at the trade desk, I'm guessing you guys are under an agile approach at the moment. Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah. So we generally follow our own flavor of agile Scrum. We take what we think works best for the time, and we affect that. So we're generally it's a mix of, we run Jira, so we're using that for backend tooling from a project tracking standpoint. But it's a mix. Some of the teams are running Kanbans. Majority of them are running Scrum. But it's a fairly lightweight, and kind of each team is kind of left to its own to decide like how they're going to run and operate their teams. We try not to be overly prescriptive there.
Right. Okay. Understood. And I guess we touched upon the queries in terms of the volume a few times before in the podcast today. What challenges, I guess, would you expect engineers to face, or what challenges would they have to solve, I guess, coming into the trade desk?
Konrad,
lots of challenges that I imagine.
Yeah. So I think it really depends product to product. We're aggressively growing in a number of different areas. Naturally, as front-end or full-stack engineers, you'll be working with making sure that the user journey and user experience is the best to what we can produce, right? And that often means, going to our traders, which are also users of our platform, and figuring out how to use the platform and how we design it maybe is not necessarily the best way to sort of do it. And so like that outreach to the users and being able to sort of proactively think about what is the best that we can produce in terms of the user journey, and making sure that, because oftentimes engineers design products with the help of designers in a very specific ways, but then you find out the users actually think in somewhat different ways, and you sort of have to readjust and align. Right. So that's sort of on a UI side. I would say on the backend side, sort of closer to the backend. As we have many different teams, we have data science, we have AI, we have product teams. It really depends on where you land, I'd say. Right. And naturally, because of the scale and because of the amount of data that we're dealing with, the problem space that you're going to be solving for is going to be around distributed computing and making sure the compute time is within the scope that we set ourselves for. So each transaction or each request, I think have a limit of 50 millis that we need to handle. And when you think about these terms, it's really about making sure that the code that you produce is well optimized and well tested during under the live, right? Because it's one thing to sort of test your code with unit tests and end-to-end tests, but the load is very important for us, especially on the back end.
Right. Okay. And in terms of architects within the company, I don't think you guys have architects at the moment, right? Is that under the responsibility of the developers?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yes, we issue the whole notion of architects being like of that kind of role here. Basically, it's always been driven by the engineering team in conjunction with the product management team for us to decide what the architecture should look like. And then that ladders down to the individual engineers that are working on their stories for identifying what the best solution is and, what the best tool set is to solve and to go ahead and build to that.
Right. Okay. Understood. And I guess in terms of engineers who are listening in today and sort of thinking about some of the, I guess, the topics discussed today, whether it's technologies or whether it's the product itself, the company, for anyone who's sort of considering sort of interviewing or working for the trade desk during this podcast, in terms of what makes an engineer a good fit for the company, it'd be great to discuss that a bit more. So, Konrad, I'd love to ask you in terms of, I think there's a preference to hire quite product-focused engineers. Is that right?
I think the focus for us is to find talent that. So we look at two aspects. We look at whether someone is a good fit in terms of the culture and how, we ask ourselves a question: how would it be to work with this individual?
Yeah.
And the other aspect of that is obviously their technical skills.
Yeah.
We have to, and it's 50-50, right? If someone is amazing technically but they're not really a good fit in terms of like a cultural fit, or we think that they wouldn't be, a good person to work with, we reject those candidates as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Understood. And I think you touched upon it earlier as well about the fact that an engineer doesn't need to have experience in C# to come and work for the trade desk, but they should have, I guess, experience in other languages. So are there any specific languages that they should have experience in, or is it any sort of backend apart from Node.js that they should have experience in?
No, not really. Like during our interview, we literally give the candidate, the space to choose their own language they want to code it with. Would we consider someone with a crazy language and that's the only language they know? I mean, like it really would really depend. I think yes. I wanted to say yes, but again, they have to be comfortable coming into a C# house unless they're going to be working with Python or Java aspects of our platform. That this is something that they will have to learn on the go, on the job, and figure it out along the way.
Right. Okay. And for yourself, you obviously came from a financial services background from Goldman Sachs and a few companies before that as well. And I think engineers who do come from that kind of background, I think especially within the front office functions, do seem to transition quite well into the trade desks. Is that the case, would you say?
I mean, so first I'm going to say that it's not a requirement. We don't predominantly, we don't only hire from financial services. But I would say, working in front office, working on trading platforms allows you to hone in on certain skills that are, very true to us in engineering. And so, there's really no room for mistake when you're building a trading platform, right? When you're working on a software that deals with huge amounts of dollars, there's really no room for mistake because, you're literally taking or giving someone money. So to recognize that importance of the code that you're building and the quality of what you're producing, that is very important for us. And we make sure that engineers, who contribute to the platform, they are responsible for the quality. And so they should be testing the software that they're building at the end of the day, right? And in terms of like UI, I'd say that when you build a trading platforms, you're literally giving a product to power users, right? Because traders tend to be power users, and they end up staring at your UI for 8 hours a day, every single day of the week. So you really need to make sure that the UI that you produce just allows them to get on with their job as quickly and mistake-free as possible. And by mistake, I don't necessarily mean bugs, but you need to ensure that the software does not allow the users to make the mistakes that they would then regret to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And I think, again, we touched upon it slightly earlier in that at the trade desk, front-end engineers also have experience in the back end, and there is some back-end work. So is there, I guess it might be hard to answer this one, but is there like a split between sort of how much UI and front-end work a front-end engineer would do? How often do they go into the back end?
I'd say it really depends story to story. Over a period of a year, I think it would average to 50-50, 60-40, somewhere in that region. that's why we're not really trying to advertise this as a front-end role or as a UI role. It's more towards full stack engineer.
Yeah. Okay, understood. And Uch, I guess a couple of questions on the career tracks as well. I think there's 3 career tracks from my understanding. There's an individual contributor track, people manager, as well as the agile manager track as well. So I guess, could you share a bit more about sort of each career track?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So the individual contributor track, which is, the one I started on, but wasn't called as such back in that day. Yeah. The idea there is, I think the idea there that sets us apart from a lot of traditional organizations is that we feel really strongly that as an individual contributor, you should be able to continue to grow your career. That there shouldn't be a ceiling, like where you get to some point and you cannot advance without shifting over into people management. Yeah. Because there's a lot of engineers out there that are very good engineers with no interest in managing other people. And that just creates for a bad situation for both them as well as the people that might report to them. And so we want to avoid that. And the way to do that is by having a career like progression that allows for that. So you can progress all the way up to the equivalent of SVP here, which is senior fellow. And you have that opportunity. And now that there are other expectations as you grow as well. Like you are going to be expected to operate with the role that, as like a tech lead effectively, right? Where you're going to be leading projects. Like you're going to be taking on larger and larger chunks of work with greater amounts of ambiguity and complexity. You're also going to be expected to participate in non-technical aspects as well, like mentoring others around you, helping with the hiring process. That's one of the most important functions that you can do at any job is to help hire and be part of that function. So, that's the individual contributor track. The far side of the spectrum where I found myself somehow is the management path. And on the management path, it's really about the people. It's really about the people and processes, and ensuring that the teams are meeting delivery, making sure that they're unblocked and that they have everything that they need, making sure that they are happy and taken care of and looked after, and to identify and work with the processes necessary to run the business. That's the management path, and splitting the difference in the middle, and which is possibly maybe the most challenging of roles, as I discussed with some of my managers this morning in the region, is the agile manager role. For that role, the expectation is you're going to be spending about 50 to 60% of your time. So the majority of your time is going to be spent with hands-on contribution, technical contribution. But these are individuals that are also really passionate about directly helping people with their careers. And they are interested in managing, but they don't want to manage a big team. And so, somewhere between 3 and 5 direct reports is where it usually lands. And that depends on the agile manager and their capacity. But, somewhere in that area between 3 and 5 is where you get that tipping point where you can't spend more than half of your time on technical contribution. And so that's the spot that splits the difference. And what's great about this is it gives people an opportunity. It gives people that are ICs that have never managed before that, get to the staff level or above and are like, oh, hey, I'm interested in maybe helping other people in their career. I want to try management. It gives them an avenue to go try that out. And if they're, if maybe they decide that wasn't what was good for what they wanted actually, and they go back to IC, or maybe they decide that's their sweet spot, or maybe they decide, hey, I'm really enjoying this, the management of people and looking after these non-technical aspects of the job as well. Let me maybe even push into the management path. Right. But it allows for a good way for transitioning between these.
I see. Okay. And of course, I'm guessing that you can transfer from one track to the other throughout your tenure, just as you did, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, there's There's a couple of managers in this region that just transferred into lead roles, back into lead roles after being managers for a number of years. So
right.
we absolutely support it. Because at different times and at different stages in your life, you're going to be looking for different things.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. And I guess in terms of the question about management, you mentioned that you're leading, you're a regional lead at the moment in Singapore. So for managing a team, for engineers who are considering going into that full stack role, working your team, how would you describe yourself, I guess, as a manager?
I think for me, one of the worst days as an engineer or as a team member is when I am micromanaged to the bone, when I'm like literally have a person standing behind my back and tell me like what to do and what not to do. Like really, as a manager, I really try to stay clear of that. And at the start, I give people 100% of trust. And it's from there, they either stay at 100% or like, they go down. So I really believe in deferring tasks to others and believing in them that, without micromanaging. We hire some of the best developers on the planet, and we pay them a lot of money to do what they do best, right? So I do not think that we need managers standing behind their back and overlooking every step they take. That's generally what I truly believe in. Because for me, I remember being in a situation where that was very annoying for me. And so in terms of leading a team, I think in any social interactions, it's very easy to sort of identify your go-to person or your favorite individual in a group. And sort of in engineering, that translates into finding your favorite in solving problems. But I believe in a healthy working environment, a lead or a manager should stay clear of that and avoid these situations. You can't be playing favorites. You need to identify, people's strengths and as well as the weaknesses, and sort of together as a team work to improve and learn from one another. It's always easy to sort of focus on what you're great and focus on doing that. But, is that going to be good in the long term for your team? I think in order to grow, you need to just keep challenging yourself and often step out of your comfort zone, right? And I'm there to help my team do that, or at least I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Good to hear. Thanks for your insights on that. And you mentioned earlier as well about the interview process, and that was one of sort of the key factors for making the decision to move onto the trade desk. So for engineers who are currently preparing to go through that or will go through that in the future, could you give like a general overview, I guess, of the interview process?
Yeah, I'd say don't be afraid. A challenge is a challenge, but we welcome people for the interview process. And sort of the way that starts is depending sort of on the role, but the general gist is that it starts with a take-home test. You can either do that asynchronously offline, or there's a version where you do that live coding, depending on whether it's a back-end or front-end role. After that, there would be typically a coding exercise discussion where you go through the problem and the solution and potentially identify some bugs and work through them together. We also have step in the process where it's just a general organizational, informational conversation. I don't want to say interview. It's more about it being a conversation. So we describe the business, we run through a presentation, because not everyone is aware of our tech space. I certainly wasn't before I joined the trade desk. So we feel it's very important to inform, potential candidates about what the company does and what the business is, right? But during those, we also measure the cultural fit of the person, like I mentioned before. So after those, you would be progressed into what we call a round of 4, where it's 4 hours of technical challenge. And so during each hour, you would be given one problem to solve. Sometimes it's more of a discussion. Sometimes it's more of a coding, and you just need to code to the end and arrive at the solution. It really depends on the interviewer. We are very good at scheduling, so it doesn't take a month or 2, but I would advise candidates to not do round of 4 in one go, in one day. Split them across at least 2 days, because you're not going to get extra points for doing everything in one day. But trust me, 4 hours of that interview is going to run you tired. Yeah, understood. Yeah, the round of 4, I think, is from our experience working with you guys, always seems to be
the most challenging. So I guess, yeah, spreading it over a couple of days to have that, I guess, a bit more time to prepare for each one would be good. And on that topic, I guess, in terms of preparation, what would be your advice for candidates preparing to go into that, I guess, the interview process in general, but also the round of 4 at the end?
So I genuinely believe when you interview, there's really 2 things. One is the technical problems, and more often than not, that's actually easier. 2 is the sort of the interviewing skill, if you will, like being able to just talk and solve problem on the go, and someone, looking at you and while you code, and there's stress, anxiety, plenty of people that we see, get stressed, and we obviously do our best as interviewers to sort of manage that and ease the person into the problem. This one is harder to prepare for. So I would focus, answering your question, I would focus on the technical aspect of the interview. Popular things like HackerRank or LeetCode, I wouldn't put too much stress into those because they typically tend to be very heavy on data structures and algos. Look, we're not going to ask anyone to write a crazy sorting algorithm. I don't think that's what we're here to do. Our problems are closer to real world problems, but you need to know, basic data structures and basic algorithms to be able to comfortably arrive at a good solution. So yeah, go on a HackerRank prepared, but don't think too crazy about it. We're not going to be asking any crazy technical algos, I don't think.
Yeah. Okay, understood.
That said, though, I think that it is helpful to do some amount of preparation in that regard. Like as Konrad said, that tends to be, particularly for people that haven't interviewed in a long time. I think the pattern that I see a lot is like somebody that's been at their job for 3, 4, even 6 or 7 years, and then this is like their first interviewing that they've done outside of that. That it can be really challenging to get back into that interviewing mindset. Our interview process is to some is like we're not gonna like parse words or try to lie about it. It's like pretty heavily modeled after like Google, Facebook, and the way that they do theirs. Like we have our own process and our own approach to it. But when you look at like the types of problems we ask, and there's books that are written about like how to go past the Google and the Facebook interview process, right? And like the types of problems and that like HackerRank has a ton of those that you can kind of go through on your own. And so part of being prepped and having your interview skills, like that other part that Konrad was talking to, is having that comfort of like working through a problem in a compressed time span. And to actually spend some time practicing on that, it's not just going to benefit like somebody looking for a job at the trade desk. It's going to benefit you like looking for a job in most tech companies. Like you're still going to be able to apply that. And so, that's the one bit of advice I would give to people as far as preparation is actually spend some time working through some of these problems. If you can, find a partner to like work on the whiteboarding sessions with you, because that's going to end up being a lot closer to what you're going to end up facing here. And if you were to go, talk to Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that.
I also found very helpful just for myself, to be able to be better at this latter part of interviewing, the interview skill, is to actually interview candidates myself. If you get an opportunity where you are right now to be able to interview others, I think that's going to help tremendously, for your future career move, and you should absolutely take that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight as well. Great. I think those are all great points for engineers to take on board. It's a challenging interview process, and I think that advice is really useful for someone who's about to go into that process. And I think from working with you guys, recruitment process is fantastic. It's very streamlined. I think Sophia over in Hong Kong, she does some briefing calls, I think, with the candidates before going into the round of 4 as well. So for candidates who are listening in, there is support up and above through the recruiters, and of course through us if we're working together on the process to help prepare and give advice where needed. Great. I think that sort of answers most of the questions I had about the interview process. So I'd love to go on to some final questions, which is sort of more like a quick fire round, just sort of shoot through a few juicy topics to end off the podcast. So Konrad, work-life balance at the trade desk, what's it like working there?
I always start my day at Starbucks, my coffee, my muffin, or whatever it might be. It's actually become my office these days. But I'd say it's a good 9 to 6. We really believe in work-life balance at the trade desk, and people are very cognizant that individuals live in their time zones and they have life outside of work time. So, when it comes to scheduling meetings and everything like that, everyone is very cognizant of these things. Yeah. Just about every important meetings is recorded on Zoom, so you can play it in your own time. And yeah.
Great. And Konrad, what are your favorite technologies to work with? Obviously not Node.js. I'd imagine it's going to be a bit of React, Redux, C#.
I hate JavaScript. No, but I think genuinely, I do believe that React.js and TypeScript and Redux has played a huge part in making web what it is today. So those are my favorites.
Yeah. Uch, how about you?
The tech stack, I'm a data guy. Yeah, I was actually the first big data warehouse guy that we had here. We use a product called Vertica, and we run some of the biggest Vertica clusters in the world, which is it's a lot like a Redshift or one of the it's an awesome platform. But I love working in just the data stack. So anything along those lines, like I've actually been a huge proponent of Kafka and like trying to bring that in here, and always making the case for various use cases we might apply it. And anything that involves millions and billions of rows and files and things getting thrown around on a regular basis. That's my cup of tea.
Okay, sounds good. Can you recall, I guess, on a typical day at work, what the worst day was, I guess, in your engineering career? Perhaps like a challenge or a problem. It was something every day, maybe? I'm joking.
No. So it used to be that it was a rite of passage breaking the platform here. We kind of had that Facebook mantra of the early days, right? Like move fast and break shit. And that was always something that people inevitably did. Like you were inevitably going to ship something. It's big, complex beast. It's like a massive platform. There's all this interconnectedness, and you're going to ship something and it's going to bring the showdown. And, I think the one, I didn't necessarily break all of production, but the biggest gaffe that I ever had was I nearly wiped out all of our data in this data warehouse.
Right.
Working late one night and failing the best practice of just having somebody look over my shoulder at what I was about to execute against a production database. And it took me, that was just one of those, just holy shit, wait. And I caught it just before it got really bad, where it got even worse, where it got into the aggregate data, which would have been a complete disaster. Yeah. It took me several weeks to rebuild that back of just hanging my head. And so that's maybe the worst moment of my career here was that, but that's me personally. And the wonderful thing about this place is we have the whole blameless review process, right? Let's figure out what went wrong. It's not about you're going to get fired because you did this thing. It's going to be all right, what did we do wrong? How do we learn from it? Now, if you keep doing the same thing, yes, obviously that's a problem. But we want it's a comfortable enough place where you can make mistakes, and the culture is such that we're gonna we want to learn and we want to move forward. We're not gonna get hung up on that's gonna be the thing that follows you for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, understood. I guess these days do happen here and there, interesting. And Konrad, do you have a memory of for example, the opposite, so the best day in engineering career, perhaps something you're very proud of releasing or pushing to production?
Yeah, I was preparing in my head before you asked me the question.
For the worst day.
And I'm okay,
we can ask that one if you prefer. Which version would you prefer?
No, I actually think this is actually not too bad, because I haven't been at the trades long enough to really have had the worst or best for that matter day. But generally speaking, in terms of my best days, is when like my stuff goes out to production and I can see real value added, to the users, and there's no bugs. That is really, for me, that's always been the driving force, to produce software without bugs. And when actually that does happen and it's a big feature, that's really what I'm proud of myself.
Okay, sounds good. And last question, how do you enjoy spending time out? I guess, Konrad, we'll start with you. How do you enjoy spending time outside of work, apart from sitting on beaches in a very windy environment? What do you get up to outside of work?
Oh boy, I think COVID really changed my likes and dislikes. Last year, I picked up running. I did like 70K a week in Singapore. That is quite challenging in the weather and the climate. Yeah, and I got like super passionate about like timing, distances, and everything. So I really became, diet and like all that. Which
app do you use? Is it Nike or Strava?
Strava. I'm a big Strava man. Yeah. So go and find me on Strava if you can. But like this year, it's I got into cycling. I really love cooking. Maybe not sushi, but barbecue and like everything else is really my forte. So I really like organizing parties for my friends, and within the limit of 5 in Singapore. And so like entertaining and also trying to pick up making cocktails and drinks, because who doesn't like a good whiskey sour, hey?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I need to come over to your place to have a whiskey sour.
My door's always open, mate.
Sounds good. Maybe we'll do something over the weekend or something.
Sure.
And Uch, same question for you.
Yeah, so I've got kids so they're a huge part of my time outside of work. But I'm really big on the sport. I do a bunch of trail running here in Hong Kong, surfing at this time of the year, paddleboarding more in the summer months when the waves aren't as good. I haven't really there's really good mountain biking trails here, but I just haven't managed to be able to fit that in, because that's like, it's a pretty big mission. You have to get it into the vehicle, go to the location and unpack, do the ride, pack it back up and come back. So that's those missions I haven't quite got the pass for as much. I am hoping to do some of that before I get out of here though. Yeah, sounds good. I used to live in Hong Kong actually. I do miss the hikes up there. Used to do quite a lot of like the Sheko sort of walk and all of that. I'm just over in Stanley, and so the Twins are like nice. My backyard, and like my regular fix is like going up and down the Twins, and I jet over to Sheko and Big Wave Bay for the waves over there. A couple times a week at this time of year.
No idea what any of that means.
Cool.
The waves
Sounds
at Big
good.
Wave Bay, not as big as Big Wave Bay implies, but they get big.
Cool. So I think those were all of the questions I had for the podcast today. I guess just to end off the podcast, the trade desk, obviously you guys are expanding very rapidly going to 2022. I think the immediate positions open, from my understanding, in Singapore are lead staff software engineer backend, senior software engineer front end, I guess, Konrad, for your team, mid-level software engineer front end, and of course, I think, as you mentioned earlier, Konrad, if there's any exceptional engineers out there that would like to have a conversation, any general inquiries, I think you guys are always open to seeing very strong engineers, especially with the growth plans. So please do feel free to reach out to myself for a chat. Always happy to catch up and talk about any of these topics in a bit more detail. And thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate your time today. Very, very useful insights. Yeah, no worries.
Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, no worries. Really enjoyed it. And I shall see you guys after the podcast.
Sounds great.
See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.